everybody. I'm Greg Murray, the Director of Life Planning at Vistamar School in El Segundo, California, and the Chair of the Data Trends and Analytics Committee for Access. I'm pleased to welcome you to our third webinar of the year, You're Admitted-ish, Data Trends on Jan Term, Spring Admits, and Alternative Pathways to Freshman Year. As we prepare for the next wave of admissions results, it's important to discuss these often unexpected admissions results that can heavily impact a student's decision on where to enroll. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Frank Cabrera, Director of College Counseling at Brooklyn Friends School and a member of the DTA committee, to introduce our wonderful panelists.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Greg. First, I want to introduce Becky Chassin, who is Assistant Dean of Admissions at the University of Southern California. She has been at USC for more than 20 years, almost as long as USC has had spring admits. So welcome, Becky. Our next panelist is Greg Dellorco, Associate Director of Admissions for Specialized Entry Programs at Northeastern University. Greg has worked at Northeastern University for close to 4 years and in the world of education for 8. Prior to working at Northeastern, he worked at a small pre-K through 12 independent day school in Connecticut, where he supported admissions, student life, and athletics. Greg has also been fortunate enough to be part of the evolution of Northeastern's spring admissions programs and leads the first iteration of our NUN-bound program in London. Welcome, Greg. And finally, we have Rick Diaz, Regional Director of Undergraduate Admissions, Southern California for Southern Methodist University. Rick joined SMU 32 years ago and has served as the past president of the Regional Association's Admissions Counselors of California and WACAC, as well as past board member of NACAC. So as a reminder to our audience, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Access member website following our presentation. We try to save a bit of time at the end of our sessions to address questions from members, so please make use of the Q&A features as we go along. So to kick us off for today's webinar, I would like to ask, USC has been offering alternative pathways to freshman year for quite some time. Northeastern University just started their program a little over a decade ago, and SMU has been a major player when it comes to admissions outcomes. Please share a bit about your institution's commitment to such programs broadly.
You can go ahead and start. This will be our 25th year of having spring admission. And one of the chief things that spring admission does for USC is allows us not to have a traditional wait list. So we are able to manage our enrollment for the fall using our spring admits as kind of a de facto waitlist or an opportunity for us to draw from that group should we on May 1 find that we have more space in the fall. We tell students about that up front, but we also tell them we won't know until after May 1st and things come in. The nice part about that and what we think is kinder and gentler than an actual waitlist offer is that it's a full offer of admission. There is no condition to it. There's nothing they have to do during the fall term. We certainly give them guidance about things that they can do, but it is a full offer of admission to start with us in January, and the potential, should we have space in the fall, to be moved from the spring admit to the fall. So that's kind of the impetus for it. It really came out of some work at the university where we looked and saw that there was just a natural decline of enrollment in the spring term. We just had more space on campus for a wide variety of reasons. We're a large institution, so we have students who do graduate in December, maybe more so than smaller schools. We have students who go abroad a little bit more. It's more common in the spring than in the fall due to some other things with balls on campus in the fall. So we just found that there was this natural decline, this ability to accommodate some additional students in the spring, and this was our way to do kind of all of those things at once. We found it to be really successful, and I'll talk more about kind of that piece of it, but that's kind of where it came from at USC.
I can jump in and talk about Northeastern a little bit. We're going into our 16th year of offering the NUN program, Northeastern University International, where students spend the first semester of their first year studying at typically between 8 to 12 different international destinations. And the list of destinations typically isn't released to students until February, even early March, for them to choose from. But really, the primary reason for Northeastern starting this is because we were seeing we had far more qualified applicants interested in Northeastern than we had space in Boston. There's only so much room and so much additional residential building that we can do within our space in Boston, and we wanted to be able to offer more positive admission decisions. So that inspired NUWin as a program to start. And similar to what Becky had talked about with USC, in thinking about our spring enrollment and spring number of students on campus, Northeastern is known for its co-op program. And we see more students taking advantage of the co-op program in their spring semester than in the fall semester. So naturally, we're seeing some students that are leaving either Boston or deciding that maybe the co-op experience they're taking advantage of is closer to their childhood home and going there for it. So we have space that opens up in our residence halls for these spring students to come and live in. I'll quickly mention that we've been doing NUWin for 16 years, but we have the NU Bound program, which is a full year program. So more of a fall start, but still it's a year away from campus for students in their first year. And that program's evolved over the last 6 or 7 years to what it is today. And it's actually got a name change to Global Scholar. So really the focal point is admitting more qualified students and taking advantage of the fact that we have students that are leaving the campus in the spring and filling their spots.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I sound like a blur from the Truman Show. I have no idea where y'all are. Yes, I said y'all, where y'all are tuning in from. But good morning. I'm here in Southern California right now, and I'm so excited to be here. So thanks for joining us. Everything that my colleagues have said, basically, it resonates very dearly and clearly and directly with how SMU came about with its spring entry program. But one of the things that we felt was really important was that sometimes, for whatever reason, students aren't ready, be it personal, social, economic, or whatever, to actually start campus in the fall. And so we needed to have a way of having an entry funnel for them to come to SMU. And that was where our spring program really started. And we found, especially because of the pandemic, financial situations are all crazy, and we all know CSS profile and the FAFSA doesn't always reflect what parents think they might be able to afford. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a way for them to actually come to SMU. And like Becky was saying about enrollment in the spring, it can be up and down, whatever. And we needed some way of guaranteeing a certain enrollment level. And by having students, you're in the spring and it's guaranteed, and it levels out this huge pendulum, and it makes it less crazy for our data modeling folks. But I'm excited to talk about the subject. It's near and dear to my heart, and I'm a firm believer in that there's no straight line to life, and it's okay when you graduate to have multiple stops along the way, because there's no asterisk that says, oh, Frank, you are really a transfer student, you didn't graduate. No, you're just like every other student. And that's what we really focus and pride ourselves on for our spring entry programs.
Awesome. For the college counselors in the audience, the impression may be that these spring admits, fall semester broads, and other deferred admissions programs are for full pay students with less competitive academic profiles. How are you shaping your class and identifying prospects for these initiatives, such as for first generation students, students of color, low income students, etc.?
I'll start again.
Yay, Becky.
So we are need blind in our admission process for fall and spring for our entire undergraduate class, so first year and transfer. And we meet 100% of USC determined need for both fall, spring, transfer, all of our undergraduate students. So it doesn't really play a role at all. We think about the spring class as the students that if we had 1,000 more spaces to offer in the fall, these are the students who would be in those spaces. we don't have those, right? So when I'm putting together the class and I run out of space, that's where I'm going to the spring class and saying, okay, I can squeeze in a few more students that we were really excited about. So by and large, it looks very similar to our fall class. Of course, we are prioritizing and wanting to have a diverse class. So we are accommodating a lot of international first gen underrep students in the fall class. So it may not be quite as diverse as a group. There's also probably fewer students with diverse backgrounds who might be choosing to take us up on spring. So while the class we admit is pretty close to what our fall class looks like, who chooses that option versus going with another option that they have in the fall could differ. We're not really in control of who takes us up on the offer. So I think it's important to remember what the enrolled class looks like is not necessarily what the admitted class is like, but in terms of need, it's really very similar, and those students typically will yield at a similar rate because we're really offering the same financial aid package that we would offer them for the fall. It's just for one semester. And in fact, when students sort of catch on that they can do community college coursework in the fall and transfer that coursework, and in fact, their first year is going to be half the USC price of a full year at USC, it suddenly, they perk up a little bit. So we try to remind them there's upsides to this as well. So yeah.
I'll jump in for Northeastern to say, in a little bit of a different sense, Northeastern is need aware, and we try to communicate with students that there is no federal financial aid that's offered for students in NUWIN as a pathway program. And additionally, there's expenses while you're studying internationally. So those are some of the things that we try to encourage students to consider when we're thinking about the fact that there's no federal financial aid. We are able to offer merit scholarships for students to take advantage of the admission offer, and to make it so it's still hopefully within a reasonable price. Additionally, when students matriculate to Northeastern, there's no matriculation agreement. All students are able to move from the NUWIN program to the Northeastern Boston campus in the spring semester. They will qualify for the Northeastern Promise, which shares that will meet the full demonstrated need based off their CSS profile in FAFSA forms. What I'll say in terms of selection and kind of thinking about the profile of students going into these programs, we see almost no difference in terms of the GPA, standardized testing, overall evaluation when we start thinking about more subjective factors. So these students are, again, very qualified students, high achieving high school students that are getting admitted. And I think there's another question later on, but we're really looking for the right fit kind of students that are going to be able to take advantage and there's a desire for them, because ultimately that's when we see the program be the most successful, is when there's not only interest from the university for them to enroll in the program, but real interest from the students also enroll.
A lot of similar kinds of discussions going around SMU regarding what both Becky and Greg have mentioned about their selection process. For us, it's a slightly different. The admissions committee, and like both Northeastern and USC, if we had a bazillion more seats, we would absolutely. We don't. And so we have more qualified applicants than we have spaces. So the admissions committee decides which students are going to be offered fall admission. And then the students who aren't offered fall admission, they're given choices. They can decide and they rank whether or not they want to be considered for study abroad. We have 2 programs, or a visiting student elsewhere for a semester and then come in the spring. If the student wants to study abroad, they have to write a special little essay to explain why do you want to study abroad, because we don't want to put someone in a situation where, I've never left my town and I want to go study in Switzerland. I think that'd be lots of fun. We need to make sure that they're aware of what they're getting into. And so that's how they decide. And then another committee decides, well, you put that as number 1, you put that as number 3, so that we'll offer you that. And students have a choice of saying, no, unfortunately, I don't want to do that. And every student has the option of being a visiting student. It's only the abroad students. Because the students are not actually students at SMU, they do not qualify for SMU funding for financial aid. That means that finances have to be taken into consideration on an individual basis for the family of what makes sense for them. in terms of first gen students, I was a first gen student, and the furthest I went away was 40 miles. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going across the planet. So kid thinking I'm from Los Angeles, I'm going to go to London, that might be an experience that every first gen is facing in terms of, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. So our study abroad programs are a little different in terms of the profile because they tend to have fewer first gen students. They tend to have students who aren't eligible, who qualify for financial aid but don't get it because those schools don't offer it. But it is something that we encourage students to think very carefully about when they're making their choices. And then come spring, they're put in the same consideration for financial aid, for scholarships as every other sophomore or second semester student. And so they just seamlessly roll into what we offer. But we work really closely with them to make sure, okay, you want to go to Switzerland. Have you ever been on a plane before? Probably you should really think carefully about this before you say yes to it. But we work very closely with them to make sure that they're making the right decision for themselves.
Thank you so much for this. And to our next question, I think you all have kind of hinted at some of the reasons and the considerations at play for offering spring admits in the first place. But when you're thinking about making the actual decision to offer a student a spring admit, why is it that the students are given this alternative? Does it have to do with more beds being open on campus? I know some of you guys mentioned studying abroad, so just being more availability. Or are you able to have more compelling students with weaker academic profiles that can be quote unquote hidden from rankings data or have more weaker full pay students into your class?
I'll go ahead and jump in first, kind of mix things up a little bit. Again, it goes back to what I mentioned about spring is up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And we needed a way to level that out so our housing people aren't going crazy. Our food services and all the support system we have on campus isn't like, okay, how many kids are going to be on campus this semester? These are kids who, oh my goodness, if I had the chance, I'd come to SMU. In fact, we give them the option of, if a space opens up, would you be interested in a fall? And if we need to, we will go back and look at those kids again. But for the most part, these kids want to come to SMU and they don't care how they get there. So if it's a semester later, we tell them it is okay. You're not going to miss out on sorority and fraternities. You're not going to, okay, you may miss out on our football season, but you can watch it on TV and have the same kind of vicarious experience, but you're really not missing anything out. You're still going to graduate on time. You're going to get the classes. You are not a second class citizen because you actually came in a semester later. And so for us, it really is, they want SMU. We just delay that gratification one semester.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this. We don't really recommend students directly to spring. Like when our staff are advocating for students, we're advocating for everyone to be in the fall. we want everyone. And it really comes down to, as we put together the class, we may not have space in particular programs for students, for all the students that have been highly recommended. And so then the spring is another sort of tranche of spaces to use to fill. So we really just think of it as the next students that we wanted to put in the class that we didn't have that space for. And here's again, like a 1,000 more spaces that we can use to make more offers of admission. So to us, it's not, we're not thinking about, oh, this student's not right for fall, but they're okay for spring, or we're not going to put them in spring, we'd only take them in fall. That's not really the consideration. We just do the fall class and then we move on and do the spring class. So
somewhat similar process at Northeastern. I think for us, especially over the last 3 years, as we've seen our applicant pool get continuously more competitive and the number of applications increase pretty dramatically. I said this before, but we're really not seeing a difference between the students that we're admitting through the NUN program and to our direct fall admission. And part of that is because of the application evaluation training that we go through before we start reading files. And it's trying to identify students that we think are going to be good fits for the program. We have on both the Common and Coalition application spots where students can indicate interest in the program, which we do lean on. We don't take it fully into consideration, but it's something that we lean on. If it's a student that we think would be a good fit and they indicated preference, okay, all of a sudden this seems like it might be a good match. But if we start thinking about students like, oh, this student is a direct admit for the fall versus this student's a little bit behind them and they're going into NUN, that's not how it works. And a lot of times when I'm giving a presentation to either our global experience office or other members of the university that are interacting with these spring students during the fall, I'll show them some of my high school rosters where a student that if you were to just look based off their GPA and SAT or ACT score or whatever it is they may have submitted, a student that's getting NUN may be above a student that's getting a direct admit. So it's about fit, it's about institutional priorities, and it's about trying to make sure that both the direct fall class as well as the spring class is going to be a diverse and well high achieving group of students.
One thing I forgot to mention actually was that for our abroad programs, certain majors are just not good fits. You know, if you're going to be a pre-med student, we need to have a little more control over the pre-med experience. And so we want them to take those kinds of classes. Not that we don't trust and value what they might be getting at the other institutions. We just want, yeah, we're OCD. We want to make sure that our pre-med programs are following everyone else's. So if you're a STEM major, you probably won't be selected for study abroad. If you're an engineering major, business students, no. So it's more the traditional humanities kinds of majors that are really good fit for our abroad programs.
So as a data team, and this is being a data webinar, we are curious to learn about the trends you have tracked over time with regard to yield rates, summer melt, GPA, and persistence. Do you have data on what % of those alternative admit ranks these programs as the, wait, sorry, let me repeat that again. Do you have data on what % of those alternate admit rank these programs as their first choice versus are admitted as a second choice program?
All right, I'll jump in first. I was really surprised when I actually started digging down into the data. We have a higher retention of our abroad students than we do because they're a smaller cohort and they, in a sense, form their own little community and they feel more welcome when they come to campus. But in terms of graduation, in terms of persistence to sophomore year, it's just so you don't even know that they were any different. And we like that. We don't want them to be singled out of, you're not really as prepared as everyone else. You really are. And we're going to treat you advising and everything else to get you out in 4. In fact, our new thing is SMU in 4. And yeah, no difference whatsoever. We don't have MELT, which is interesting in that sometimes you want MELT, especially from our housing office. But yeah, it's a robust community and it's seamless. It really is seamless for us.
Ours is in terms of the quality, that it's really the same as the fall class in terms of GPA or academic quality that you would measure. We don't see a difference. The yield is basically the same. I think the yield's slightly higher on spring students. You know, again, I think this is the group we're kind of like, oh, could we get them in? We really like them. So, you know, maybe that means there's a few more students in there who are really, really excited about USC, which makes us excited about them. In terms of persistence and graduation, they graduate on time with the students who began in the fall. That's typically not an issue. We certainly can help them plan to do that if that's their, which is the goal of most of our students. As I said before, it's not a conditional admit, so students don't have to do anything in the fall term. They can take time off. They can do a gap semester. They can work. They can, travel, do whatever they like. Many students, I would say the vast majority of our spring admits, do choose to enroll in coursework, whether it be at a community college, or we have some partnerships with, or don't call it a partnership. We have some agreements with some of the universities abroad that are on US systems to have our spring students begin there. And so they'll do transferable coursework there. And we work closely about what type of coursework that should be and how they can line that up. And so many of our students, fall and spring, are coming to us with credit out of high school, dual enrollment, AP, IB. So it's not really an issue of like being behind. Even a student who didn't take coursework in the fall certainly could work that out in the 3.5 years that they're at USC. So typically they graduate at the same time as the students who began in the fall. So that's not really an issue. As far as MELT, that's kind of an interesting question. So we do a thing that might be different than other schools, which is on May 1, we say, do you think you want to do spring? Let us know. That's the group that we'll look to if we end up having any space in the fall, but the deposit is not due until August 1st. So we understand some students sort of say like, sure, if I got moved, I would take you up. But other than that, I'm going to go to this other school I've already been admitted to. And so they can deposit at the other school. They're not double depositing. They're just sort of literally submitting an online form saying like, yeah, I'd be interested. So we do get some drop off over the summer between students who said, yeah. And then on August 1st are like, no, never mind, I'm doing something else, totally fine. And then we have some drop off in the fall as well. So some students do go to other places or do other things or decide that in the end it's not for them. And so we'll see some melt between the students who on August 1st were saying that they were coming and who actually shows up in January. But we also have full-fledged programs for these students. So they have orientation programming. They have the same type of advising and registration that our fall students do that happens in December. We're doing it remotely now, so that's kind of much more convenient for these students. We have a host of welcome week activities that happen each semester, so that's not something that they miss out on or that's different for them. Our campus, again, we've been doing this for a long time, so is well equipped and sort of very used to the fact that there are new students joining us in January, and not just undergrads, right? We have a class of spring admits in the first year and transfer groups as undergrads, but we have lots of grad programs kind of enrolling all the time. And so we know there are students coming to our campus who are new to our campus all the time. And so that's kind of built in and baked into what happens here.
What we're seeing for students that are going into the spring is that their retention to the university is very similar, it's very low. That we're seeing almost all of our students move from the fall semester internationally to the spring semester. There are cases, especially students studying internationally. I think right now what we're seeing is a heightened sense of some students feeling anxiety around the experience, which is completely understandable. So we have a university health and counseling services team that is dedicated to supporting those fall students and trying to make sure that they're feeling not only comfortable upon their return to Northeastern, but really comfortable during the semester that they're away. The yield for NUN was slightly lower than what we were seeing for the direct fall yield. And one of the adjustments that we made this current admission cycle is Northeastern offers early decision 1 and early decision 2. Previously, if a student had received anything other than a direct fall admit, they were released from their early decision agreement. The change that we've made is we've allowed students to indicate a yes, this is my preference on the Common App, which I alluded to earlier. If a student said, yes, this is my preference to NUN or Global Scholars or other pathway option, and they received that as an admission decision, that is then keeping the binding agreement of early decision. So we're expecting that's going to increase the yield a little bit. I don't think it's going to be substantial because typically students are saying their preference is to start in Boston. Graduation is a question that we get all the time when we start thinking about these spring programs. Families and students specifically being concerned about this extending their time to graduation. And we share that students are receiving transferable credit from the institutions that they're going and studying at. So they'll still be able to study in their 4 or 5 year time frame based off how many co-ops they're completing. And then co-ops, the other major question that we receive. Will I still be able to complete co-op if I'm doing this spring admission program? And yes, it's still a 50% divide of students doing their first co-op during the second semester of their second year or first semester of their third year. So there's very little difference in terms of what we're seeing between the two profiles of students.
I appreciate a lot of the nuggets of information that you guys just shared, especially as it relates to my next question, because in my experience, when I've had students being offered admissions for a spring program, it's often met with more angst and confusion than it is excitement. But I think there's a lot of great opportunities that we can help our students understand to see the benefit of what can be a spring admit. So from your vantage point, how can counselors speak honestly with students and families about why they may have been offered a spring admission and maybe some of the opportunities that come with that?
I'll just jump in that it's no different than a conversation about why was I denied admission. It's you're not starting in the fall, but guess what? This university is giving you a pathway. It's a guarantee. You deposit, you start in the spring, and you will graduate like all your other friends. And the only thing you're missing out on is that first semester. The challenge that I face when I'm working with counselors and students is making sure they understand. I had a mom want to know, okay, what countries is she going to see while she's traveling? No, it's not a tour program. She's actually going to be studying. No, you can't live with her while she's in Switzerland. Well, can I live on campus while I take a community college courses? You are not an SMU student, so you can't live on campus. And so it's more of making sure the student understand this is what you need to do. If you're taking classes, we need to see a transcript to make sure you didn't flunk out. We need to have certain conversations, and it's more of a matter of commuting very, very clearly. And there really shouldn't be any angst. It's more the fear that students would face anyway of not starting at the same time, or even starting in the fall. Will I know anybody? Where will I live? What kind of food? All those kinds of things that students will face regardless of when they start a university.
Very similar to what Rick said, that a lot of these conversations are going to be similar. I think the biggest thing is having honest conversations with students about is this something they're ready for, and is this something they're comfortable with? Because with this program, they're going international at Northeastern, and we want this, again, it's a successful program when the students as invested as a university is in them. There's excursions that are planned with them. The dining experience is going to be well explained. The academics are there. There's going to be between 200 to 300 other Northeastern students that they're with. But at the core of it all, is the student really ready for this? And that's an honest conversation that I think school counselors can have with the student, and really, bring to light something that the student may not have thought of. I think for students that are getting the NUWin program, many of them are very excited about the fact they got this positive admission experience, and they don't think about the reality of, I'm going to be away from my parents for 3 to 4 months. I'm going to be away from my hometown. I'm going to be away from all these people that have been my support system for so long. And all of a sudden I am in a different country with maybe a different culture, all of these things. So I think that honest conversation is something that counselors can definitely provide feedback on, but also just really be kind of a benefit to the student on. The other thing that I meant to mention that relates to the last question is that for students that receive NUWin as admission decision, they have 2 enrollment deposits that they have to submit. So if we think about this, going back to the last question, we see a lower melt for NUWin because there's a bigger financial commitment that goes along with it. And at the same time, I think students sometimes feel like, okay, once that first enrollment deposit goes in, I'm locked in, and then the realities start coming in. So I think that the earlier that you can have that conversation with the student, and just speaking honestly about what their experience may be like, the better.
Yeah, I think it's a little like, and I'm sure you all have had these experiences over and over and over of you go to buy a house and you're like, well, I love this house, but I don't really like the street that it's on. And maybe it's a little above the budget that I had planned. And rarely do we find kind of the perfect house on the perfect street in, right in our budget. And so we have to sort of decide, well, what's the most important thing? I cannot go over my budget. This house is not for me. Or, I think I can make this work, and I'm I'm okay with it being on this less than ideal street, right? It's not great, but I don't think that's going to bother me. Everything else about it is really great. And so I think now more than ever, there's different things coming from different universities and colleges. And I think families are surprised by it because they're not aware of kind of what the landscape is and what's out there. And so, you know, maybe it means talking about that sooner, right? Talking about that with juniors and seniors and saying like, there's a lot happening in college admission, and fall start, you know, in the program you applied to is not the only response you're going to get. You might get something different. You might get general studies. You might get an, you know, second choice major. You might get an alternate admit pathway. You might get a guaranteed transfer. You might get spring admit. There's all, you know, we can all name all the places that are doing all the things. And so I think if people were a little more heads up about that, it would be less surprising, and they'd be better prepared to say, okay, I don't have all equal choices here, right? In the same way that students might not have all equal financial aid packages or scholarships, or so now I need to decide, or we need to decide as a family, which is the right combination for us. You know, I really want to be at USC, so I'm okay starting a semester later, or I really want to just head it out to college and go there. So SC is off the table for me, but this other place that I've been admitted to is an option. So I don't know that it's different than some of those conversations you have when students don't get their first choice major, or don't get an aid package they were hoping for, a scholarship they were hoping for, and you kind of walk them through like, well, okay, decide what, decide what's what, decide what's, you know, sort of the priority when we have imperfect choices. And I think that's actually like a thing that will happen their whole life over and over. You know, we as adults know, like we encounter these things all the time. It's the job you want. It's not quite the salary, or it's a longer commute, or, you know, so I think that this is one of the first times their students are having to make a big decision with maybe imperfect choices, or not choices that are all sort of exactly the same. So I would put that in that, you know, in that basket, and that might help you think about how to approach this with students and families when their first instinct is upset, when maybe it can be like, well, you know, there's always going to be a variety of different factors, and it's up to you to decide. You know, we have no problem that students say like, I don't want to start in USC in the spring. Cool. Like, I get it. I totally do. Or they say like, I need a scholarship, so I'm going to go to this other school. I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. So I think colleges understand, and our you know, our feelings are not hurt by that. But I think there is sort of an initial reaction of upset when it didn't all come through, you know, sort of neatly as they had hoped.
I love Becky's analogy of buying a house. That is so. I'm going to borrow that. It really is a matter of transparency, of making sure students understand what it means. Wait, I thought this included that, or wait, I can't do this if I do that. And this is where we need your help, counselors, of if there's a common question that we keep getting, that means we're not doing a very good job of explaining it. That will help us change our website. That will help us create these FAQs, but it also puts responsibility on the students to read their emails, to actually go to the website and look for all this information. And so it's a two-way street. We try and be as transparent as possible about, this is the deadline, this is what it means, this is what you need to do. And there is an understanding that you have read those kinds of things. And so I won't put any of my counselor friends on the hot seat right now, but I've heard them say, did you open the email they sent you that explained what the program? No. Okay, let's start at base one. And we love that. So the support that you get from us is going to be unconditional, of helping your students, because if they're a pain they will be a pain to you, your school, to us. And so we will be supporting you as you communicate with the parents and the students as well.
Rick, I think you just signed yourself up to come to a visit to New York and help the kids read their emails, because 17-year-olds are just a lot of fun.
Yeah, we know. Like, wait, I applied. Don't I get information about a portal? Yeah, I can tell you already even opened the email 2 days after you applied 2 months ago. I'm not understanding your question. You already read the email 2 months ago.
the central problems of working in a high school, without a doubt. And I think to this next question, I think this is also something that that you all have answered and addressed in differing moments of today's conversation. But could you discuss the ways in which these programs will impact students in the short term and the long term, whether it comes to financial aid offerings, housing implications, Greek life, diplomas, credentials, graduation timelines, etc.?
Zero. Other than they don't get preferred seating in our football stadium in the fall because they're not SMU students. Other than that, it's seamless. They're considered for everything that a returning second semester first year student would have in terms of classes, in terms of everything. So it is not a negative by starting in the spring at all.
I'll say if we're going to break this down between short term and long term, the short term is it's going to look very different because you're going to be at one of these international sites for that first semester. So that experience, again, is something the student has to be well prepared for. And even a little bit further down the line, but still short term, is coming to campus as a second semester student after completing, for us, a program where you were part of a very small student cohort. When we're doing our welcome days and we're talking to admitted students, and I'm hearing from families like, what is the experience for students as they come back to campus for that second semester? I'm oftentimes talking about the fact that we have Spring Fest, where clubs and organizations are trying to recruit new members, and that Northeastern in general is a very transitory community where students are coming and going. That's just the nature of the university. But it's still an adjustment. It's still students going from a very small academic setting where they know just about every one of their classmates to one where they're at a medium to large private university with 18,000 undergraduate students. And they're now navigating a very complex university where for that first semester, maybe there was a little bit more hand-holding. So I would say Northeastern's always trying to improve what the experience is like for students coming back during their second semester. But I think it takes a student that's willing to really put themselves out there a little bit to socially have the same experience as a student that was given a direct fall admit. But then, to Rick's point, in the long term, they're a Northeastern graduate. They're graduating in their desired time frame. They'll get the need-based financial aid once they qualify for it in the second semester. Merit scholarships are there. Everything else is at their disposal. It's just, it's to me more of the short-term adjustment the student has to be prepared for as opposed to the long-term.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's not a lot of difference. We've already talked about sort of graduation rate and what students do and those kinds of things. A few years ago, they changed the way that the fraternity and sorority system works. And so that begins, students can't rush until one semester after they have completed one semester's worth of work. So our spring students, their first semester is that spring term. And some houses then only do rush in the spring. So they wait until the following spring to go through rush. I'm not aware this is a huge issue. Only about 20% of our students belong to Greek letter organizations. So this is also not like the majority of our students, but that is a question that we get and that we answer and let folks know about and understand. Technically, I mean, they're spring admits. So like I said, it's not a conditional offer of admission, but if they bring in coursework that they've done since leaving high school, they are transferring that in. So they have sort of that transfer GPA and the USC GPA. That doesn't impact a lot of the students either. And again, we give guidance about the type of coursework that they should take in order for it to be transferable and useful to them in their USC degree. So there's quite a lot of support around it and a lot of communication, as Rick mentioned. We hear feedback from folks who have come, and we sort of say like, they're like, every year they'll be like, you should really tell spring admits this. And we're like, we do tell them that. So we are always looking though to see if there's something we're missing or more information that we can give so that we can be clear about just what the offer is. And I think it's absolutely appropriate and fair for a student to say, I want to know if I'm making these unequal, or choices among all of my different colleges that have offered me things, that I have a clear understanding of what it looks like for each school. Our spring admits will get a financial aid package. It will only be for one semester, but they'll know at the point that they've been admitted to spring, here's what it will be when you begin with us in January. So it's not like something they have to wait on or be unsure about until they come. So we try to provide provide as much information as we can for them about that.
Both Greg and Becky made me think of two things. First, we only have spring Greek recruitment. So they are students coming back from Switzerland. They're eligible to go through, and that actually is the most common question I get from students. But if I study abroad in the fall, wait, I didn't mean to sound so OC or Valley in that. So if I study abroad the first semester, does that mean I don't have an opportunity to rush? No, you do. And that's a very, suddenly they light up like, okay, that's going to be okay. And we actually include all our spring admits in all our send-off parties. And so they are during the summer meeting with all of the other students who are coming in the fall, and they're almost take it as a bragging right. Well, you're in Dallas, I'm in London, okay, and that's going to be an amazing experience. And so they almost wear it as a badge of honor. And it's just, yeah, we try and include them as part of the Mustang family from the very beginning because they're just starting a semester late. Sure.
All right, and the final question from the committee is, what is the next version of spring admissions to help enrollment? What are you doing for transfers as transitions between schools become more common, or online offerings in lieu of on-campus experiences? What's on the horizon?
So I said this when we were preparing for this webinar, and I then wanted to bite my tongue and make sure no one on campus heard me. I would be very surprised if there aren't schools who will have a sort of begin online option for students. So students would be, this is not something USC has talked about. We actually don't have a lot of online offerings even after the pandemic. We're still not a lot of online offerings at the undergraduate level, but I wouldn't be surprised by that. Or maybe partnership or agreements with schools that are doing online work for students to begin online and then transition to the campus. Just from a, if I'm just thinking from a revenue perspective, from a enrollment perspective, that's one of the ways to manage this without having to sort of have other campuses abroad or those kinds of things. Again, not something USC is talking about. This is not a heads up about it. It's just as I was thinking about the question and thinking about, we definitely have more online than we used to. And I would say many of our students, while they did not like fully online learning during that pandemic year, they are not mad about an occasional online class along with their in-person stuff. So I think there's much more acceptance that that might be a way that some students find it works for them and is okay for them. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that, to see other kinds of partnerships or other kinds of, we're starting to see campuses that are closing, other campuses are subsuming those students and or campuses. And so that becomes opportunity for other kinds of things happening. So I think as the world of higher ed kind of shifts and changes, and there's some folks who are no longer part of it, what happens to a college campus with a bunch of dorms sitting in the beautiful, in the middle of a beautiful place, it remains to be seen. So I think there certainly have got to be provosts and presidents out there with dreaming up other things.
I feel like that's a segue to what's going on with Northeastern right now, because we have merged with two smaller institutions, in Mills College in Oakland and the New College of Humanities in London. So Northeastern now has what we're calling a global network of campuses with NU Oakland and NU London. We'll have students that are studying at both of those campuses full time, but then we're also leveraging those campuses for pathway programs. I'd mentioned earlier this idea of the Global Scholars Program, which is an evolution of NU Bound, which has constantly had different iterations for the last 7 years. But the idea with Global Scholars is there'll be about 700 students admitted into this program that will, or not 700 students admitted, 700 enrolled students into the program that will spend one semester in Oakland and then the second semester in London. There'll be about 350 students at each of the locations, and they'll flip. What is challenging is what Rick alluded to earlier with majors and being compatible. We're currently saying that we are compatible and that sites are going to, the site sequence is going to be determined by the staffing at each of the universities. But it gets really complicated. And for the student, they don't really have a say in where they're starting. So I think that's something that's going to be interesting to see if that impacts yield at all. But I think programs like that, I mean, Becky said it, I think just new iterations or evolutions of these programs will continue to develop. We've talked about kind of like expanding our Explore program, which is our 2-year undeclared track for undergraduate students, because there is more academic flexibility with that. It's more of like a generalized, general studies program, or could be considered something like that. So expanding on something like that and leveraging all the resources that these huge universities have, because there is the desire within the student market to attend these places. And a lot of university presidents have grander visions of expansion. So see where it goes.
I'm going to do my best impersonation of Carmack the Magnificent. We have, okay, I just dated myself. I see you all Googling very quickly. Yeah, Johnny Carson. But the lost my train of thought. Wow, coffee is not kicked in. We have articulation agreements with many community colleges around the country. If it were me, if I were some president, I would say, go ahead and make clear, delineated, you take A, you get B automatically. And because kids like knowing in advance, if I do this, then this. Articulation agreements are close, but they're not. You take English, math, you take these 4 classes, you are guaranteed admission automatically with a B average or better into SMU. And I could see that as relieving some of the stress of students having to go onto our site to see which classes count. Do I take it? What about my major? If we have it really in place, clearly in cement, if you go to Santa Monica City College, I'm in LA, or PCC, then it's automatic, and that fear is gone, and that stress of starting second semester disappears. But yeah, I wish I were Carmack the Magnificent, like, oh my God, teleportation, whatever.
A question that came up in inspiration from what you guys were just talking about. How do other institutions respond to the inevitable attrition they experience as a result of some of your programs allowing them to enroll elsewhere, but with no intention of staying until graduation?
Oh, yeah, I am all over this. Every single kid who is going to take a semester, spring entry semester elsewhere, I said, make sure you tell the school you're only there for 1 semester. And then we can't force them. We don't ask for proof. It's up to the student. But in some ways, is that any different from a kid who enrolls at SMU knowing that they're waiting to get off the wait list at another school? We don't know. And that's why we have to plan for spring entry for this up and down cycle, because we don't know. We really don't. But we encourage students and their families to be completely honest with the school they actually attending if they know in advance they are not going to be enrolling for the second semester.
I kind of have mixed feelings about this. Part of me thinks that the university might have an opportunity to sway a student to stay and to fully enroll and commit themselves to that university. And then the other logistical like part A of my brain is thinking how frustrating that is logistically to figure out if there is a certain percentage. I think ultimately a lot of college and universities are savvy enough to realize that a portion of their first year class is going to be leaving just based off trends that they can see. So I don't think one individual student is necessarily going to make or break their class, but I can understand the frustration if it grows from one student to a substantial percentage of their class, because these pathways are becoming so much more popular and so much wider use by different institutions. So I think it's a two-edged sword. There's an opportunity for that university to matriculate that student. At the same time, logistically, I fully understand why there's frustration there.
So we have about 7 minutes left in with our time together. So I encourage any of our participants, if there are any lingering questions that you may have, please use the Q&A box and we will get to them if we have time. So I will just start from the very, very top. Our first question from the audience is, can spring and med students say, I'll start in the spring, but I'm doing something else in the fall, such as a gap year? Or gap semester, sorry.
At USC, yes, it's not a conditional offer of admission. So we let them know, here are some things you can do, but we always have students who also just take a break.
The opposite at Northeastern. You're committing to the program because of these partnerships that we have with the international universities. They need to plan for how many students are going to be attending. There's a huge financial commitment on both sides for students to be there. So if they are admitted to NUN and they want to matriculate to Northeastern Boston's campus in the second semester, they need to participate in the program. The exception to that, because there's an exception to everything, is if a student has learning differences, any kind of disability that can't be accommodated by the host institution. If that's the case, they can contact the admissions office. We have what we call a site advising and guidance process. So we have our Disability Resource Center, our We Care University Health and Counseling Services team, as well as our Office and Global Services, review survey submissions from students that are saying, hey, NUN truly, I would do NUN if I could, but it's truly not the right fit for me, but I want to be at Northeastern. So if that's the case, they submit the survey, it's reviewed by that team, admissions and communicates back to the student. And then they're given the option of not coming to Boston, but completing a semester elsewhere, or just taking a gap semester and then starting the spring term.
And for us, they actually submit an enrollment deposit that's due May. We try and keep all deadlines the same. So they have a May 1 deadline to actually submit the deposit for guaranteed spring entry. And then if they change their mind, well, then it's no different than a student not deciding to enroll.
What portion of the class do spring admit students typically make up at your respective institutions?
So I'll give an example. Our first year class is usually around 31 or 3,200 students joining us in the fall, and typically about 400 new first year students in the spring. And then at the transfer side, we have about 1,300 transfers join us in the fall and another 250 in the spring. So not as nearly as large, but not nothing. They're not starting by themselves.
It's about a quarter of the class at Northeastern.
We look for an entering class of about 1,500, and again, this volatile spring semester, so it varied from year to year, and that's where we're trying to even it out as much as possible.
Another question that had come in. These programs all sound like they require students to be equally admissible for direct fall entry. Are you aware of any programs where a growth-oriented student could be a good fit?
So I work with 4 different pathway programs at Northeastern. NUN's the one that I focused on for this presentation. Global Scholars I've referenced, both of which are, to your point, still are there for high achieving students that are within the university's profile. The 2 other programs I work with, NU Immerse, is for students that are non-native English speakers, and the academic profile of those students is typically a little bit wider. And it's students that aren't meeting the TOEFL or IELTS scores or Duolingo scores that are most competitive for admission. So the English proficiency scores are typically lower, and the GPA for those students is typically lower as well. I also work with a program called Foundation Year. It typically has between 75 to 100 students enroll in it, but that is specific to Boston-based students. So students need to live in a Boston zip code, but that is designed for kind of these growth students and students that don't have a lot of advanced credit that can then matriculate to the university. It's not spring admission, it's actually fall. It's a full year program.
I would imagine that the answer to this question has to do with the overall selectivity of the institution for their fall class. So places that are less selective that also do spring admission probably are taking a lot of students who aren't as, academically look a bit different or a bit lower than the students they're taking in fall. 25 years ago when we began this, we were not as selective as we are today. And so, we had space for all of the strongest students who had applied. We had space for them in the fall. And so they got admitted to the fall. And our spring class was not as strong academically. They were fine. They certainly were students who could do the work at USC, but in terms of GPA, they did have a lower high school GPA. That's been less true over the past 15 years as sort of our applicant pool has grown. The number of really strong students we have far exceeds the amount of space that we have. And so more of those students are just students who get admitted to spring. So I think that would be the main thing. If you were looking at a school that was, a bit out of reach for a more modest student, and they had spring, you could probably think about or talk to them about whether spring might be an option. And some schools have students can apply directly to the spring term. So they may take applications both for the fall and the spring. So there's basically every flavor out there. It's just about kind of figuring out what's what and what does everyone call it.
And for us, for students who are on that slow growth path and not ready for college for whatever reason, we actually, we call it a 24-hour admission. And it's not a guaranteed admission, but they have access to all our advisors to make sure that they are taking the classes to be competitive as transfer students a year, not a spring, a year. There's no deposit. It's our normal transfer process. And that's where we work with students to provide that feedback of, okay, you weren't admitted, not the end of the world. But if SMU is your choice, we will find ways for you to get here and graduate with everybody else who started, from your school this fall. You're just starting a year later.
All right, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. It is 2 o'clock. On behalf of the Data Trends and Analytics Committee, Rick, Becky, Greg, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your enthusiasm, and your expertise. We wish you well as you head back into reading season. Best of luck. Send you all good and great vibes. Thank you, everyone, for your time this afternoon, and we'll see you next time.